Hello everyone, I'm Jay Joshi and welcome to the 38th episode of Learning Java. Today we'll be learning about inheritance. So, first of all, what is inheritance? So, when we covered object oriented programming, as you know, Java is an object oriented programming language, there are many aspects to an OOPS programming language. Some of them are like polymorphism, which you already know. Polymorphism is the method overloading. Like when you have multiple methods of the same name, this is a feature of object oriented programming. Another feature of object oriented programming is inheritance. So, what is this inheritance? So, for example, you have two classes, okay? You have two classes of different names. And the second class has something in common with the first class. So, you want to use some of the properties and attributes of the first class. These attributes can be variables or methods. So, let's say you have a class A and a class B, and the class B wants to use some of the methods and variables and some of the other attributes of class A. So instead of writing all the codes of class A into class B, you can inherit those attributes from class A. So this is what inheritance is. It's a relationship between two classes where the attributes of one class are inherited by another class. And this is like a relationship formed between classes when they have similar features. So for example, I want to perform something in class B which is very similar to in class A, so I can inherit those properties from class A. Then this inheritance is called inheritance essentially. So why do we need inheritance? So as I mentioned, again, instead of writing the code again, you can just reuse the old code. It is also used for code generalization, and it helps in the overall maintenance of the code. So, as I mentioned, an example, let's say you have a class A. This has some features. For example, it calculates. So, for example, you have a class A which calculates the area of a square, rectangle, and other shapes. And you have a class B which calculates the area, perimeter, etc. of all the spherical objects like a cylinder, a circle, a sphere, etc. Now, in this class, you also wanna calculate the area, perimeter, etc. of squares, rectangles, etc. So instead of writing all that code in class B again, because it's already written in class A, you can inherit those properties from class A. So this is the main class, and this is the class where which is inheriting those properties. So this class, which is the main class, is called the parent class, because this is called the parent class because this is the class which is giving those properties, giving those attributes, giving those methods to its child. So this is called the child class, and this is called the parent class. So the parent class is also known as other names such as superclass or base class, and this child class is also known as the derived class or the subclass. So this thing, main thing, is the superclass, and this thing is a subclass. So a simple way to remember the parent and the child: the parent gives its properties and attributes, everything, to its child. This is a basic noble inheritance, like its English word. Now, there are five types of inheritance, but Java supports only three types. So, those five types are single level inheritance, multi level inheritance, hierarchical inheritance, multiple inheritance, and hybrid inheritance. So, these are all the five types, but Java supports only these three. If you want to implement multiple inheritance and hybrid inheritance, you will need to use an interface, which I'll be covering in a later video. Right now, just know these three main inheritances which Java supports. So first we have a simple inheritance. So like this example, this is a simple inheritance in which a child class inherits properties from its parent class. So this is single inheritance. A class B inherits properties of class A. Multiple inheritance is when the child has multiple parents. So this multiple so a child can have two parents, A and B, and this is the child. So the class C, the child class C, inherits properties from class A and B, but this multiple inheritance is again not supported in Java. You need an interface for this. Then we have something called a multi-level inheritance. So multi-level inheritance is just two or more single inheritances. So for example, a class B inherits the properties of class A and a class C inherits the properties of class B. So this is how the cycle is going. So B inherits all the properties of class A, and C inherits all the properties of class B. So you can assume A as a grandfather of C and B is the father of C. So one important point to note here is something called transitive nature of inheritance. So if a class B inherits the properties of class A, then the class C will inherit the properties of class A and B. Why? Because this B is an inheriting properties of class A and this C is inheriting properties of class B. But B itself inherits properties from class A. So thus C is inheriting properties from class A and B. So technically, like how multiple inheritance is inheriting properties from A and B directly to parent classes, in this case as well, it's inheriting properties from two parent classes, but there's a filler in between. There's a child class in between. Then we have a hierarchical inheritance when one parent has multiple children. So you can see there's one parent A and all these other subclasses B, C and D are all inheriting all the properties of class A differently. An important point to note here is that B and C don't share any properties among themselves. Same applies for C and D and B and D. These three are separate, but all three have one thing in common is that they all three share the properties and attributes of class A. Then we have hybrid inheritance. Again, this is also not supported in Java. And this is a mixture of two types of inheritances. So hierarchical inheritance and multiple inheritance, thus the name hybrid. So this part, the top part, is the same as hierarchical inheritance. A parent has two or more children. And this bottom part is the multiple inheritance, when one child has two or more parents. So again, because multiple inheritance requires interface, which is not supported in Java, hybrid inheritance is also not supported in Java. So these are essentially the five main types of inheritances. And as I mentioned, the transitive nature of inheritance, if a class B inherits the properties of class A, then all the subclasses of class B will automatically inherit the properties of class A. So since B is inheriting the properties of class A, all the subclasses of B, let's say we have C and then we have another one D and then we have everything, E, D, C, all will inherit the properties of class A because that's how the flow goes on. Now, how do we essentially do this inheritance? How does this work? So let's say you have a class A. This is your parent class. This is the big class. And this has two types of variables, two integers, y and z. Ignore the data type for now. I mean, the access specifier. And then you have, so this is one class. It has only two lines of code. And then you have this other class, class B, which extends A. So extends is a keyword which is used to implement inheritance in Java. So if a class B extends A, it means all the properties and attributes of class A are going into B. So A is the parent class and B is the subclass. That's why B is inheriting from A. B extends A. So you have to use this keyword. And one important point to note here is that you can't do something like class B extends A and C, because again, this is not supported in Java. You can't have two parents. So you can only have one at a time. And this particular class has only one variable int x. Now, within this class B, if you create an object, it will have the variables x and y as well. So essentially, it will have all the variables of its own class and all the variables of its parent class. And if you, let's say I create a class C, so class C will be something like class C extends, in small, the case is important, extends B. So in this case, class C will have access. If we create an object of class C, it will have access to its own variables, it will have access to the variables of class B, and it will have access to the variables of class A. Now, again, now coming back, so this is inheritance. It's very simple, just an extends keyword. There's nothing complicated in this. And again, this is used for code usability, so you don't have to write the code again and again. And it's used to reduce the complexity of programs. Now, what are all these access specifiers? So there are three access specifiers. There's actually multiple, but there are three main: public, private, protected. So when we create a class like public class, public static void main, any function with public, public is an access specifier. So these are the three main, and then default we'll cover later, like later right now. Public essentially means that if a variable or a function is public, this variable can be used by any other class. So all the class that inherits it in the same package and another package, it can be used by every single class. That's why it's public. So that's simple. Protected, however, can be used in any subclass, in any child class, in the same package, but it cannot be used in another package. So this is what protected is. In protected is a bit more complicated, which I'll be covering in a later video, but that's the essence of it. Private variable can only be accessed in its own class. So this is why it's written over here that class B won't have access to variable Z because it's private. So if we inherit, then the variable Z won't be inherited because it can be only used in its own class because it's private. So public and protected variables can be used in this child class. This is what I'm trying to explain. And private can't be used in the child class because it's private. It can be used only in its own class. Now you might have noticed that sometimes when writing a function, we just write void fun or something like void fun. We don't specify public, private, or protected. So then it's a default access specifier. When we don't specify anything, it's default. Like this int x, we haven't specified anything, so it's the default. Now default is similar to protected. It can be used in the child and subclasses of the same package, but it cannot be used in the child or subclasses of another package. So it can be inherited in the same package, just like protected. However, public can be accessed across any package, same package, different package. Private can only be accessed in its own class. So if you don't want to, for example, if you don't want the other class to inherit a variable or a method, you can declare it as private. Now, there are other ways as well. There's a lot in inheritance. There's something called method overriding. Polymorphism also comes under inheritance, some aspects of polymorphism. There are other keywords such as final and all, etc., which I'll be covering in a later video. But this is essentially just a gist of what this extends keyword is. This is the main thing. And again, how to implement a hybrid and multiple inheritance also I'll be covering in a later video, and how we can use it using interfaces. So that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you have any queries, also suggestions, you can mail me. My mail will be in the description down below. And thanks again for watching.